To start, can you tell me a bit about where your family is originally from?
Okay, so my name is Barlow Mugrdechian. On my father's side, Bob Mugrdechian, our family is from the region of Vaughan and from the city of Vaughan, and more specifically from the suburbs of Vaughan. It's a place called Ikistan.
Hmm.
And then from my mother's side, my mom is Norma Mugrdechian. Her family came from the area of what's called Tokat,
Hmm.
which is near Sepastia or Sivas up in the area of Armenia, Turkey today.
Great. I was wondering if you could tell me what you know about your ancestors on your father's side of the family.
Well, actually, we have a pretty good family history back to the beginning of the 18th century because my grandfather wrote down his memoirs, which includes a lot of information about the family. So we can kind of trace our history back at least to the beginning of the 18th century. So I know that in my case, with my last name of Der Mugrdechian,
Mm.
the Der indicates that there was a priest in the family. So my great great grandfather was the third in a line of three priests that served in the area of in Vaughan, and so that's where we get the Der Mugrdechian part of that. So there's a lot of history that we know about the family, but what we do know as far as immigration is that my grandfather immigrated to the United States in 1917. He had actually visited earlier in 1911, I believe, but permanently settled beginning in 1917.
Great. And do you know what your father's side of the family's life was like in Vaughan?
We do have a good idea of what they were like, at least during the period of these three priests. Apparently, they were parish priests at the local church. My family was also pretty well off, according to the memoir, that they had some properties and businesses, and they lived a pretty good life in the area of Vaughan. So the memories are good as far as the area and the life that they were living.
Mm. And that's fascinating that you can trace your family history back to the beginning of the 18th century. Would you mind sharing more about that?
So actually, again, it's just coming from my grandfather's memoir, which is called Anushavan. His name was Anushavan Dermagerdichin, and basically it just goes back that there was an 18th century forefather, patriarch, Aga Ardzruni, who was the sort of founder of the family. But actually, we can probably trace our history back even further. We think, according to historian Robert Hewson, who actually looked at our family history and
Wow.
kind of came back with pretty much a reconstruction of how far back it might go, which is kind of interesting, which actually goes back to the 10th century
Wow.
because the area of Vaughan was part of the Artsuni kingdom at the time. And so, using the information that was in my grandfather's memoir, he was able to kind of reconstruct that history.
Mm. And can you share more about your grandfather Anushavan's life, what you know about that?
Yeah, he was born in 1880 in Vaughan, and again was the only male child in his family. Had older sisters. At the age of 16, he got involved with the Armanagan Party, political
Mm.
party, and actually was part of the defense of Vaughan in 1896
Wow.
during the period of the massacres. And then he was pretty much working, got married with my grandmother in the early 20th century, I believe 1907, and then got in a lot of trouble with the authorities because of his political leanings. And so he was incarcerated a couple of times on kind of fake charges, revolutionary charges. He left and came to America, as I said once, and then he actually was not in Armenia, not in Van in 1915 when the defense of Van took place, but his wife and his all of the rest of his family were in Van while he was in the United States. And then, so they went through the defense of Van, and then when they retreated to Russia with the Russian army, my grandfather volunteered to come back to Armenia and did, and reunited with his family.
Wow.
Then it's just a long story, but I mean, basically, because his father was a priest, there was a need for a priest in a local community here called Fowler, which is
Mm-hmm.
just to the south of Fresno. There's a St. Gregory Armenian church there. And so he was invited, my great grandfather was invited to become the parish priest. And that's how they ended up in America. And they took a very interesting pathway because they were in actually in what's today Ukraine, and then moved across the Trans-Siberian Railway, across Russia, all the way to Vladivostok. And then they traveled to Japan.
Mm.
And there they met Diana Apkar, who was the first woman diplomat of the Republic of Armenia in 1918. But later she became that. But she was at that time a humanitarian, someone who was helping Armenians. And my grandfather met her, and then they went to San Francisco. So we have that whole story of how they did that. San Francisco, and then coming to Fresno, and then to Fowler.
Wow. Um, that's great. You mentioned your grandfather visited America in 1911.
Before the
So
genocide.
before.
Yeah, and during the genocide, he was in America. So
Okay.
he was not, yeah.
Do you have any stories of what the conflict was like for his wife and family that was there?
We don't have a lot of it. We just know that they were there. They were involved in the sense of the family was there. They were able to survive. And then when the Russian army had to retreat, they went along with them
Mm-hmm.
back into the Russian side of the border so that they were saved from the genocide. And there's lots of interesting stories associated with that. But then my grandfather was able to make it back to Armenia, to the Russian Empire, and then was reunited with the family.
Wow. Do you know why your family had to go to all of these different locations before coming to the United States when they were getting out of Armenia?
Well, so what happened is that, again, so everyone in my grandfather's family, his wife, his parents, his sisters, all were forced to retreat with the Russian army. So they ended up in Armenia. We call it Armenia, but the Armenian section of the Caucasus of the Russian Empire. And then from there, they just simply were looking for work and places to go. And then that's why they traveled to, what's Ukraine. And then once my grandfather received the invitation for his father to come to America, then they had to travel. And the only way to go was across the railway.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering, could we turn to your mom's side of the
Mm-hmm.
family? Could you tell me what you know about their lives in Armenia?
Yeah, we know quite a bit less, unfortunately, about my great grandmother because my grandmother and great grandmother were part of the genocide. So that their family was deported from Tokat,
Mm-hmm.
and my great grandfather was killed, and only my grandmother survived. So just my great
Wow.
grandmother and grandmother, and they actually went on the marches, the deportation marches, and ended up in northern Syria, southern Turkey, what's today. Um, were in camps, eventually in an orphanage. So they went through a very tragic period. We don't have a lot of information about them at all because there's just nothing that survived.
Yeah. Do you know when your grandma was able to leave Armenia?
So again, so what happened is that they went through the marches, and then she was actually adopted into a Turkish family
Mm.
for about 3 years. This is probably 1916, 17, 1918. And then when the war ended in 1918, she was able to be reunited with her mother.
Mm.
And then they traveled to Aleppo, and then they traveled to Beirut. And then when they were in Beirut, my grandfather, who was already in America, my mother's father, was already in America, was already a U.S. citizen, and
Mm.
had served actually in World War I. So he had escaped earlier. He was looking for a wife. So in those days, if you were looking for a wife, you wanted someone from your own town or village. And he sent back, like to a newspaper ad or to people, I'm not sure who, uh, asking for pictures of potential brides. And so when they say postcard bride, my grandmother was the one that he
Oh,
chose.
wow.
And then she immigrated to the United States. I think this was 1927.
Mm. And do you know where in the United States they went in
Well,
1927?
so the interesting part is my grandfather was already based in Fresno at that
Okay.
time, and then he had one sister, and they were the only survivors of their family. But he wanted to bring my grandmother in, but immigration required her to go to Mexico first.
Mm.
And then he was going to marry her in Mexico and then bring her across the border. But it turns out once they got married that the immigration rules had changed or they didn't understand them, so she wasn't able to come for a year.
Mm.
So they stayed for a year in Mexico. And then the story is that they learned that it was easier to emigrate from Cuba, so they were able to travel to Cuba from
Mm-hmm.
Mexico and then come into the United States. And there's
Wow.
a article that was published in the local newspaper, the Fresno Bee, which has their picture and tells the story of that trip. And then we have actually my grandmother on my mom's side wrote her memoirs also. So we have
Mm.
whatever information we have about this comes from that memoir. It's been translated to English and published.
Wow, that's great. I also was curious, what was the year that your father's side of the family came to Fowler?
So it was 1917.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you tell me what you know about what both sides of your family's early life was like in America?
It's a good question. My grandfather, when he came, was a farmer. So basically, in Fresno at that time, there really wasn't any industry, and he wasn't really a professional in the sense of a teacher or anything. So
Mm.
he just became a farmer. It was a tough life because the 1918 20s began into the Depression, so life was pretty difficult.
Mm.
Everybody had to work, so they all worked on the farm. He wasn't a too successful farmer, and there really wasn't a lot of money, so it was a tough beginning. My dad was born in 1920, so
Mm.
he remembers and has written about it in his own memoirs. He's written his own memoirs about life, and so he talks about it. It was tough. It was not an easy life. There wasn't a lot of food and clothing and everything else, but they were able to make it. Same thing on my grandfather's side, my mom's side. He worked for a local department store, Gottschalk's, which is no longer in business, but he worked for that and had a small house. And he had 5 children. And again, it was a tough time because my grandmother didn't work. She didn't really have a
Mm.
job. And so, but he was able to build a small, family house, and then they purchased another house to rent. So they was able to make it.
Mm. And I'm curious, you mentioned Anushavan was very involved in political parties in
Mm-hmm.
Armenia.
Mm-hmm.
If his involvement in community and politics translated when he was in the US as
Oh
well.
yeah. So he was very, very much involved with AGBU.
Mm-hmm.
He was involved with the Armanagan party here, which later comes to be called the Ramgavara party. So the Armanagans joined with the Hunchak, one part of the
Mm-hmm.
Hunchaks, to become the Ramgavar party. So he was very active in Ramgavar circles, and he was also very active in the Armenian church. He was a parish council member, very active in the church.
Mm.
So yes, he was very, very active in the community.
And from what you know about your father's life, what did you what do you gather was his sense of Armenian identity and culture growing up?
Hmm. Well, I think he's what I would call the second generation, which is the first generation would be those that immigrated. Second generation are those who were either very young or were born in America. So my dad was born in America, but he had that sort of dichotomy that all immigrants have that are born here, with immigrant families. So at home it was purely Armenian
Mm.
because they knew very little English. So everything was in Armenian, but then he went to school, and when he went to school, he remembers he didn't know any Armenian, but of course, English, he didn't know any English, but of course, he learned it very quickly and pretty much, was able to, quote unquote, assimilate into American life, but at home, he was purely Armenian. So I think there's that clash of cultures that immigrants have because what do you keep, what do you discard, how does it change you? There's so many different ways of looking at that, right? The spectrum of identity. But I'm very clear that he wanted to keep his Armenian identity, and keep it means that he was very active in the church, and in Armenian organizations, and wanted to marry someone that was also in that way. So he married an Armenian uh, who was also involved in the church and was also interested in keeping their identity. So that translated to my generation.
Mm.
Whereas others might have taken a different path, marrying out of the culture, which doesn't necessarily mean you don't stay Armenian, but it leads to different types of identity as well.
Yeah. Can you tell me what your mom's life was like growing up?
Yeah, again, it was a pretty tough life, meaning financially, I don't think they were totally well off, but at least they were okay. And she went to public schools, and she got married quite young. So she was, I think, 20 years old when she got married.
Mm.
So she got also a part-time job, but she was a full-time mom for the most time. And then later on became a part-time teacher and volunteered. She was a Sunday school teacher for, I don't know, 40 years, 40 plus years, very involved in
Wow.
the church, very involved with community and, kids' lives, whatever, PTA, all of that stuff. So,
Wow. And do you know if she spoke Armenian at home as well?
oh yeah, definitely,
Mm-hmm.
definitely, yeah.
Can you tell me what the Armenian churches meant for this first and second generation of Armenian immigrants?
Well, I'm just from my experience here in the local community, there were at least 5 Armenian churches in our local community. Local means San Joaquin Valley community, probably even more than that.
Mm.
So I think that the churches were kind of an anchor for the community, and really by definition, they are communities because there were churches. And so the people that stayed active in those churches pretty much maintained their Armenian identity longer than perhaps others who didn't.
Mm.
So I think it plays a very important role.
And I want to transition a bit and talk about your own
Mm-hmm.
early years and background.
Mm-hmm.
You were born in Fresno,
Mm-hmm.
is that right?
Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit about what your early life was like?
So pretty much went to public schools. So I didn't go to any Armenian school. There wasn't a local Armenian school until the 1970s, late
Wow.
1970s. So basically went to purely public schools, American public schools. But we also went to Saturday Armenian school.
Mm.
And Saturday Armenian school meant that you went to the church and they gave Armenian language classes. So I can remember that we did that. And then Sunday we had church and Sunday school.
Mm.
So we pretty much went to school every day of the week.
Wow.
So grew up again because both my parents were active in the church. Church was a big part of our lives, and I have three. There are 3 brothers and 1 sister in my family,
Mm-hmm.
so 4 of us. So we were just pretty much raised in that environment of pretty much the Armenian environment, meaning that we were involved in the youth group, for instance, at the church. So the young people were Armenian. Again, I talked to you about the classes and activities. So yes, we were also active in our school activities and school clubs, but we also had the Armenian dimension for it.
Mm. And can you tell me about what those other activities were like for you?
The non-Armenian, or
Yeah, anything else you did growing up as well?
oh, well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I was pretty involved in school, meaning I liked school, so I, really excelled in it. Did well in school, and went to the local Roosevelt High School, which is one of the oldest high schools in an area which was still at that time. So this is 1960s, actually 1970s. 1970s was still had quite a few Armenians, so it was a
Mm.
very diverse school in terms of cultures, meaning lots of different groups of people, no real one dominant group. So we got to, interact with people, and it was a real good experience.
Yeah. Did you get to spend a lot of time with your extended family growing up?
Sure, we spent most of our holidays, major holidays, with both sides of the family. So
Mm-hmm.
we would spend like a lunch with my mom's side and then dinner at my dad's side. We did all the birthdays, celebrations, weddings. I have lots of cousins, so I think we have like 30 cousins between the 2 sides. So growing up, most of them were still in Fresno. So lots of activities, graduations, and we were very much involved, definitely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you have any favorite memories of those times spent with relatives?
Just getting together was the food was always really important. It was a big part of it, and both sides of the family were good cooks, and so there was always plenty of food, too much food, but so very much involved with that. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Can you tell me more about your favorite Armenian foods?
Oh, sure. It's all the typical Armenian food that Armenians would eat. So, from kebabs to kufta, they call it, or lamajuns, or
Hmm.
pilav and subareg, and just every Armenian food, yalanchi, which is the
Hmm.
rolled um, um, grape leaves with rice. So just really everything. I mean, they were really, really good cooks, and they would put out food for 20, 30 people on the big holidays, Christmas, Easter, special occasions, birthdays.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite part of experiencing Armenian culture growing up?
I think it was just so much just kind of a part of it. It wasn't just like one thing I remember in particular. I liked all of it. So it was very much just everyday part of our lives. I
Hmm.
mean, but I felt I was perfectly American as well as perfectly Armenian. And I say perfectly, meaning that there was no problem transitioning between the two. Like at school, I didn't feel like I was an Armenian outsider or, you know, there was discrimination and prejudice in Fresno, but it didn't touch, I believe, my generation in that way. So I didn't feel that from any of my friends, other students
Mm.
that would say, "Oh, you're Armenian," and use it derogatorily. So pretty much it was pretty easy in that sense.
Can you tell me more about what you know about that concept of discrimination that was happening as well?
Well, yeah, it's a big long story, but basically, many Armenians when they first came, and first came means to Fresno, so this is already in the 1880s when immigration began. By the early, by the time we get to the 1920s, already Armenians were being discriminated against. That's formally, and then also there was a sense of prejudice. So the discrimination we know because there was housing discrimination. So we have deeds which specifically include Armenians as well as other groups as being prohibited from living in certain neighborhoods. So that's discrimination, right? We
Mm.
also know that Armenians were discriminated against in schools in the sense of even in colleges, they weren't allowed to be in some fraternities because they were Armenian.
Wow.
We know that the first Armenian teachers were not hired in Fresno until the 1930s, which meant there must have been people who wanted to teach, but they just weren't allowed. And I've heard many examples of Armenians in the workplace who also were discriminated against. They weren't promoted, given higher positions because they were Armenian. So we know all of that existed in Fresno at least through the 1930s, 40s. Then after the war, as things began a little bit became in America more sort of open, and by the 1960s, when you get civil rights movement, and then things really become open, meaning less legal
Mm.
discrimination, then Armenians really moved into many areas in Fresno and all areas, including those areas that they had formerly been banned. So there were neighborhoods in Fresno that were known that Armenians could not live in. Some areas were okay, I mean, like in the city, but some neighborhoods were specifically prohibiting Armenians from living there, but also blacks or Mexicans or Indians from the country of India. So there was
Mm.
specific discrimination.
Wow. And do you know that specific restriction on where Armenians and other ethnicities could live? Do you know when that started to change?
Well, again, usually it's after the war because after World War II, then a lot of veterans came back. People had gone and served in the army and things, and so people had kind of mixed a little more, you might call it. But then also the attitudes in simply in America began to change,
Mm.
and I think by the 50s already the movement was starting, and then the 60s was the social movements, black rights, but just in general to be a minority or otherwise, there was a greater awareness that people should be able to express their own cultural identity without being discriminated against.
Mm-hmm.
So I can remember some people saying that they didn't like to speak Armenian publicly in Fresno, maybe in the 1920s or 30s, because you would be looked at poorly.
Mm.
Today, I don't think there'd be a problem in doing that.
Yeah. I was hoping, could you tell me more about the neighborhood that you grew up in and what
Hmm.
that was like?
Yeah, so so most Armenians lived in what's today called the southeast part of Fresno. So actually, if you go back early enough, and I'll show you a map a little bit later, there was an Armenian community. Well, the churches were the anchors of the community. So actually, most people lived very near the churches.
Mm.
And then slowly, as you begin to see, over time, people began to move out as they did. We lived close to the churches, maybe a couple miles away, but it was a very Armenian-oriented neighborhood. It's called Butler Avenue. And just, a lot of our neighbors were Armenian, not all of them. I used to deliver the local newspaper called the Fresno Bee.
Mm.
So many of my subscribers, many of the people, of course, who took the paper were Armenian. And I would know that, obviously, because I would collect money and, know the names. So it was just a pretty diverse neighborhood again. But when I went to school, elementary school, I walked to elementary school and middle school, and there were just, Armenians and other people all around.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned your involvement and your family's involvement in the Armenian churches. Were there any other significant Armenian institutions that you were aware of growing up?
Well, the ones that we're involved in was AGBU, which is today the world's largest kind of humanitarian organization.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of events around that because my parents and grandparents were involved in it. There'd be things that we would go to as kids, like picnics or
Mm.
luncheons or just events, which we grew up with. Church was around. Sports was and youth. There was a youth group called ACYO, Armenian Church Youth Organization, still in existence
Mm-hmm.
today, and we were involved in that simply because that's the outlet that we had. So those are the main things that I was involved in.
Were there any cultural heritage sites in the area that you visited?
You mean in Fresno?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the time there were the churches would be the real cultural
Okay.
heritage sites, and then at the time we could still remember that there were coffee shops and a lot of stores and restaurants, and there's still a lot around, but the Armenian names would be pretty visible as you're traveling around. So you'd see a lot of
Mm.
Armenian places.
I also want to talk about your own experience
Mm-hmm.
speaking Armenian. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned you went to Armenian school on
Mm-hmm.
Saturdays. Did you also speak Armenian at home?
Not exclusively, but we did speak a lot of Armenian. And then when we were with our grandparents, I wouldn't say that we spoke so much, but we certainly understood that, and they were only speaking Armenian.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty much it's just been part of my life as far as learning the language. But then it wasn't really until probably college that I really, you become more aware of like consciously wanting to learn a language or to learn more about the heritage. So
Mm-hmm.
actually it was here at Fresno State that I began to really focus on really trying to do that more. Even in high school, I was already involved in that. Of course, I talked to you about the Saturday school, but it's not until you really get to college that you kind of make your own choices.
Mm.
And so I made a choice to kind of take a few Armenian classes because I was more interested in the language and then just learning more about the culture and history in a way that sometimes is not communicated in the family, right?
Yeah.
Because in the family, they tell stories, but it's not kind of historical in that sense. It's historical, but it's not told in a kind of a chronological or historical way, like other parts of history.
Mm. Can you tell me a bit more about what high school was like for you?
High school, that was pretty much normal high school experience for me. Just normal high school
Mm-hmm.
clubs, organizations, sports. I didn't participate in sports, but Was very involved in the high school in different things, clubs and stuff, but nothing extraordinary. Nothing. I don't think you know
Hmm.
that stands out that much. But yeah.
And can you share more about your experience in college and any graduate studies?
So college was interesting because, as I said, when I came to college, I came to Fresno State, and the first few years I didn't really take a lot of classes. I didn't take any Armenian classes, but in 1978 I went to Armenia.
Mm.
So I was with the Armenian Church Youth Organization, and so in 1978 I was in college, and in the summer they had a summer program in Armenia. This was through the church.
Wow.
And at that time, Armenia was part of the Soviet Union, so it was not easy to ever go to Armenia. But I think that trip was a kind of a big one in the role that it played because I went for a month with about 10 people from all over the United States. So I got to meet other young people from the United States, and then we got to go around a lot in Armenia. So we visited all the cultural sites, the churches, Echmiadzin. We took classes like specifically cultural classes, language classes. I mean, in 1 month, it was a pretty intensive experience. So that one was a big one that really had an impact on me because when I returned, then I said, well, I think I want to take a class now because I want to see, something about that. So that's when I first began to take classes, 1978.
Mm.
At that time, also, then we had a Professor Kyumjin who was the director of Armenian Studies here at Fresno State. And then through him and through the classes, I also began to meet other Armenian college students.
Mm.
And there was an Armenian students organization on campus. So I became involved in that, later became the president. And then it kind of revived in the 1978-79. And the newspaper I gave you, Hai Sharjum, was actually published in 1979 by
Mm.
the students. And I was involved in the first publication. It's now 46 years old. So
Wow.
um, that really got us involved. And then through Dr. Kyumjin and his teaching, and just he was an interesting professor,
Mm-hmm.
very different than the normal professors. He got me more interested in Armenian things. And then that's kind of when I changed my focus. I was a biology major,
Mm.
and then kind of wanted to continue not as in biology, but after graduating, decided to go into Armenian studies.
Mm. Wow. What was it like meeting and connecting with other Armenian students at the college level?
Yeah, it was really interesting because it was different than at the high school level where there maybe were Armenians, but they weren't all so interested in Armenian things. The ones I met at college became people that we shared a common interest in, learning more and becoming active on campus. We did April 24th commemorations. We held a lot of events,
Mm.
brought a lot of people on campus. So it was fun because you had a group of people that had common interests.
Wow. And can you tell me what you did after graduating at Fresno State?
So after graduating at Fresno State, I decided to go to UCLA. So UCLA has an Armenian Studies program. Actually, it had not one program, but it had a history program under Dr. Richard Hovannisian, and then a program in Near Eastern languages under Dr. Abedi Sanjan. So you could either be a history major, Armenian history major, but history, or you could go into language and culture, which is the angle that I took, or the
Mm.
way that I got in. So I took the courses with Dr. Sanjan, but I also took them with Richard Hovannisian, who was well known in obviously as a historian. And so that's kind of how I went into the Armenian studies.
Wow. And when did you graduate from that program?
So in 1985, I finished, and what happened is that Dr. Kumjian said that there's an opening to teach part-time here at Fresno State. So he invited me in the fall of '85 to come back. We were in conversation, and he invited me to come back, and I started part-time teaching 2 classes in the fall. And then in the spring, he took a leave to go back to France because
Mm.
he lived in France. That's where he was from at that time. His wife lived in France. So I was running the whole program the first year I was here. So in spring, I was teaching all the courses and then doing all the activities and everything. So pretty much got thrown into it pretty quickly. Yeah.
Wow. Can you tell me about any challenges you had in your first years running the program?
Yeah, it was a lot of challenges. Obviously, it's just getting used to the community, getting used to what's happening in the university, what we were doing. Running a newspaper. I was helping the students organization. I was doing my own work, managing the program,
Mm.
scheduling classes, teaching 4 to 5 classes a semester. It was really busy.
Wow, that is
Yeah, it was a
sounds
lot of
very
things going
busy.
on.
Can you tell me about your favorite class to teach?
So I've had a lot of classes. I mean, I've pretty much taught all of the classes that we've offered. Everything. So we have a beginning and second year language course. We have a history course. We have courses. We have introduction to Armenian studies. We have an Armenian literature and culture course, and then an Armenian art course,
Mm.
which is one of my favorite. That and the language class. I taught the language class really for it's been almost 40 years that I've been teaching it. Last year we have a new professor, so that person is teaching that language course, but it's a course that I liked a lot because a lot of students were in those courses, and they were excited to learn, so it was fun. Got to really learn the language. And then there's an art class that I teach, which is dealing with architecture and manuscript painting. So it's a popular course for non-Armenians too.
Mhm.
So it's fun. It's just the teaching about all the beautiful art of the Armenians.
Can you tell me more about the art that you
Yeah, that's
teach?
actually you can look at online if you go to our website. We have an Armenian Studies Program website, and one section is called Arts of Armenia. And the Arts of Armenia then it's 15-week course. That's our typical semester. So I teach 5 weeks about Armenian architecture. So we cover the historic churches, the development of architecture, etc. Second section, 5 weeks, is about miniatures. So we talk about Armenian miniature painting, manuscripts, history of it, history of the alphabet, history of illuminations, manuscript illumination. Then the final 5 weeks cover various other what we call minor arts. They're not minor, but things like Armenian metalwork, religious objects, bindings, sculpture,
Mm.
reliefs, carpets, khachkars, just about everything else you can think of. So that covers the last 5 weeks of the course.
Wow. Has it been difficult ever getting people involved in Armenian studies and the minor especially?
Well, I think it's not difficult, but it's something that every group of freshmen you have to tell them about, to tell the story, or talk to them. So it's just constant. I'll use the word propaganda in a good sense, but it's speaking to people, and because people may not even be aware of it, right?
Hmm.
I think now students are aware that we have a program, so they're there. But it's just constantly reaching out. So every year, if you're coming to Fresno State, you have to take an orientation
Mm.
called Dog Days, actually. That is, a freshman has to take this 1 day orientation, and then they can register for courses. So I reach out to the students that I can reach out to that I know that are coming through the advising people, and find out, and I send them letters and notices and say, hey, this is available, and if you're interested, take a course, and there's scholarships available. We have lots of scholarships. So in that way, we try to get them early, and then get them involved, and then also suggest to them that, hey, you can do a minor if you start early, because many of the courses are in GE, right? So you're covering both. You can take a GE course that's covering your GE, but also will work towards your minor. And that way they can figure out, oh, it's not so difficult. It's not going to, make my stay here that much longer or anything. So
Hmm. Can you tell me what you see as the value of studying Armenian language and history and culture?
yeah, there's a lot of value in just learning about the world at large. So any culture that can be taught, I think, is important, especially Armenian culture, because it has a long historic span of several thousand years, 3,000 years of history. So the experiences of the Armenians are something that are interesting to people. The religion is interesting. The language and the alphabet are different, so that's interesting. So it has a lot to offer. I think
Mm-hmm.
any group that can offer something to the world at large, I don't. I think adds to it rather than subtracts from it. So I think it would be kind of boring just to take only American everything, right? So adding Armenian culture gives a really added value to it,
Mm-hmm.
to education.
Have you been able to visit Armenia again after your 1978 trip?
Oh, quite a few times,
Oh,
probably
great.
40 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So since 1978, the second time was 1988, which was the year of the Armenian earthquake in December. But I was there in the summer, and I had actually taken my first group of students. So we organized and took a group of students, we as myself, we went and spent a month in Armenia. And then I've done that 10 times since, taken groups. So
Wow.
every 2 to 3 years, I organize a group of Armenians, students studying Armenian. They don't have to be Armenian, but mostly they are, who travel, and we go to Armenia. So we did it 2 years ago in 2023. In between, I've been to Armenia almost every year for a variety of reasons. It's never just pure tourism. It's always with projects. We've had grants to work with universities. Currently, I'll be going in July for a conference that I went to one last year, also similar conference. So just a lot of reasons to go. I've been there for a lot of important occasions, interesting occasions. I'm involved in the church, so the election of the Catholicos, which took place in 1999, the current Catholicos, I was a delegate, so I was there for the election of the Catholicos. It was also the period of the Karabakh movement in the 1980s, so I was there in 1988 for the big mass demonstrations, meetings. I've been to Karabakh 5 or 6 times. I was able to visit in 2019, right before the war, in 2020. Yeah, so I can give a pretty good history of Armenia from my own perspective. So yeah, it started a long, long series of trips, a lot of trips. Armenia is like a book in itself for me. I mean, there's just so many things, so many people. It's the people that I've met. It's the places I've been to. The really interesting historical, obviously places that everyone wants to go to. Some that are maybe not as common, but I've been able to travel over the entire country, through the country, probably seen more of Armenia than people who live there. Just like, everywhere, right? Sometimes you overlook the places
Huh.
that are right around you. So I mean, just there's just so many memories of everything, and just high points. Again, people that I've met, Catholicoses, university presidents, artists, musicians, just people I've met through my interactions. A lot of things with universities now. Madenataran, which is the manuscript library, Yerevan State University, um, the Armenian Genocide Institute. I have lots of ties with them. The monument, Armenian Genocide Monument. Yeah, I mean, just so many things that it's really, I've got to write it all down at some point.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about any research projects you've done and books you've written for Armenian studies?
So basically, I've not authored a single monograph myself, but I've edited multiple books. So one of the earlier books that I did was a Festschrift. The Festschrift is a collection of articles in honor of someone. So to honor Professor Kayumjan, who I spoke to you about, on his retirement, I published a book that has 45 articles. It's a large book. I'll show it to you later. Studies in honor of Dikran Kayumjan. And then in the terms of the books, we have this Armenian series that I mentioned to you that I'm the editor. So we published 22 books in that series. And then I've done translations of other books,
Mm.
articles. I've written my own articles, my own research materials, just, the whole area of research. Yeah.
Mm. Can you tell me what kind of things you cover in the Armenian series?
So the Armenian series covers just a lot of things, from the Epic of David of Sassoon to more of a historical look. So we have lots of history on different aspects. We have memoirs. We have a book on Western Armenian music, which is one of our latest books. We have several books on the Armenian genocide related to that. So it's just a wide variety of books, which are a really pretty good idea of Armenian culture.
Mm. Do you have a favorite part of Armenian history that you like to study?
It's a good question. I've always been particularly interested in the genocide as a topic, both from a historical, just wanting to learn more about it, but also the denialism of that, the denial of the genocide, and then the politics of that. That's one area, but because I teach Armenian history, so I'm really interested in just about every
Mm-hmm.
area of it. In other words, it's something I enjoy teaching because every era, every period has so much history and so many interesting things to talk about.
Wow, yes. Could you talk about your more recent involvement in the church and what that's meant for you?
Well, as I said, I've grown up in the church and I've been just involved in it. So, with the Armenian Church Youth Organization, I was eventually the chairman of what's called the Central Council of the Armenian Church Youth Organization. So, it's kind of central body. Since there are maybe 25, 30 churches, so each has its own group, but then they have representatives to the larger organization. Then I became involved at the local church level, at parish council
Mm.
level, taking on different responsibilities. Then I went to the diocesan level, which is again the overarching diocese, Western Diocese of the Armenian Church. I've been the chair of the assemblies. I've been chair of the diocesan council. I've been a delegate at the elections. Just involved in pretty much every aspect of the church.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what do you see, if there are any, as the differences between Armenian churches in Fresno in America versus what you've been able to observe in Armenia?
That's an interesting question. Uh, it's the same. The actual church service is the same, but obviously the people are different. So you have the different cultural aspects of being Armenian, which are expressed in different communities. So
Mm.
in America, because we're American Armenian, we are American Armenian. We do things slightly differently culturally than people would in Armenia. So, the way certain holidays are perhaps remembered or celebrated, or the way different sacraments like weddings and baptisms are done. I mean, the ceremony is the same, but then what you do might be slightly different. Not really different, but
Mm.
slightly different.
Wow. And can I ask, are you married and do you have any children?
I'm not married and I don't have any children. No.
I was wondering if you could share more about what cultural things you do to preserve your Armenian identity.
Well, it's just for me, I'm pretty much just deeply involved in it. So everything that I do is pretty much involved with culture. So I'm involved, I mentioned to you, with the William Saroyan Museum. So that was founded in 2018 on the location where William Saroyan lived from 1961 until he died in 1981, 64 to 81. He lived in this house and it became a museum. And somehow I got involved in it, and now I'm pretty much heavily involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm involved in that. I'm involved with AGBU quite a bit. And then all the activities that we do here, we have a lecture series and a film series. And so every year we do an average of 20 to 25 programs. Programs are events.
Mm.
So these can be lectures, these can be film screenings, this can be concerts, music concerts, this can be conferences, um, just about everything you think of. I have a list of it all. We've done almost 600
Wow.
events in the last 40 years, and I have a list of all of them, so I know what we've done, and it's in our newspaper, so we've documented it. All of these are just cultural activities, let alone just the visitors that come, from out of the country or different places. So we just constantly, everything that I'm doing is involved with the community.
Mm.
And a lot of working with non-Armenians, as I said, like the film series. We work with Cineculture, which is a local campus film series. So we bring in Armenian series. We have a keyboard concert series at Fresno State, which is a piano series, brings a top flight pianist from throughout the world.
Wow.
But we always work with them to bring in Armenian musicians as well. So I think it's even better when we can integrate the Armenian cultural elements into broader community elements, and then that way the broader community also gains an awareness of the culture as well as maintaining it among the Armenians.
Mm. Can you tell me, do you have any long-term plans for the Armenian Studies program here?
Well, we've been building the program financially. We're done very well. Last couple of years, we've averaged over $100,000 in scholarships just to our students. So we give 50 to 60 students a total of 100, 110, $120,000 in scholarships. We've built endowments to support us financially for our programs. We're trying to increase the number of students, always getting a minor, keeping them involved, and then just building an even larger program is what we're working at.
Mm-hmm.
Maintaining and also building, even in an environment sometimes when it's difficult because the state of California is financially sometimes in difficult times. Actually, this is one of them. There's kind of a budget crisis, and it's
Mm-hmm.
affecting the Cal State system and the University of California as well.
Yeah. I was wondering if you have any hopes for the future of the Fresno Armenian community as well.
So everybody talks about, future, how long do diasporan communities last, etc., because there's various ways of looking at that. I think the future is good. I mean, there still are a lot of immigrants coming, so that means there's always kind of a constant contact with the Armenia and with other communities. So there's Middle Eastern Armenians, there's Armenians from Iran, there's Armenians from Turkey, there are Armenians from just about every area in the world in Fresno.
Mm.
And so those ties, because they're tied to all those areas and to other communities, I think there's always going to be, in the next 50 or 100 years, there's still going to be a very strong Armenian community. It's going to change. Maybe it will become a little bit more Americanized even than what it is today, but I still see the institutions doing well, but it's a constant struggle. You can't just say, okay, everything's going to be fine. You have to constantly work to update, modernize, and engage
Mm.
the younger people.
Yeah. And along with that, what do you feel are the challenges of preserving a diasporic community?
It's a challenge of every diaspora. And in other words, what is it that you want to maintain? And I think you want to maintain the sense of Armenianness, which comes from knowledge of your own history, awareness of cultural values, awareness of what Armenians have done in the past and are doing today. So I think that's the main aspects that you want to look at in maintaining. I mean, the culture.
Mm. What do you think would be lost if the Fresno community of Armenians was lost?
Well, I mean, when you say lost, you lose the history and the knowledge of the existence of a community with everything that it produced, all the cultural artifacts, all the places, all the things. Today we have a genocide monument on campus. You can take a look at it. I don't know
Mm.
if you know about it. There's a lot of, things that would all just simply just be artifacts if there were no people. So I think it's important to keep the community going, because the loss would be to the greater Fresno community.
Mm. And on a personal level, I'm curious if you feel more Armenian in the Fresno community or perhaps when you visit Armenia.
I don't think there's any difference in that sense. I feel I can fit comfortably into Armenia when I go. So they'll know that I'm not from Armenia, but they don't have any different look. as saying you're not Armenian or
Mm-hmm.
anything else. And the same thing here, fit pretty much into the community and recognized as such. So pretty pretty much part of my life.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell me what being Armenian means to you?
Well, being Armenian just simply means that I come from a historic area, a place called Armenia. So that's where my roots are from. And so I have that knowledge of that history and that background and that culture. And there's a continuity that goes back to that time. So I feel I'm part of this, like, you know, stream of time, and not necessarily just the one place, but it's part of being a community that's existed and is still existing. So that is what being Armenian means. I mean, you could easily just say, I don't want to be involved, meaning just become American, but you'd lose a lot of things that I think are valuable.
Mm-hmm.